Chapter 2. Not 100 yards due north of Norman's shop, as fair flies to Griffin, there stands a public house which is the very hub of the Brentonian universe. Solidly constructed of old London stocks and fondly embellished with all the Victorian twiddly bits, the Flying Swan gallantly withstood the slings and arrows of outrageous brewery management. Its patrons have never known the horrors of fizzy beer or pub grub that comes a la basket. The Swan had grown old gracefully. The edge-glass windows, tinted with nicotine and the exhalations of a million beery breaths, sustained that quality of light exclusive to elderly pubs. The burnished brass of the beer engines shone like old gold, and the bar top glowed with a deep patina. The heady perfumes of brassel and beeswax blended with those of hops and barley, grape and grain, to produce an enchanting fragrance all its own. Only a man born without a soul would not pause a moment upon entering the Swan for the first time, breathe in the air, savour the atmosphere, and say, "This is a pub." But of course, for all its ambience, redolence and Ridley Scottery, a pub is only as good as the beer it serves, and here it must be said that those on offer were of such a toothsome relish, so satisfying in body and flavour as might reasonably elicit bouts of incredulous head-shaking and murmurs of disbelief from the reader. Nevertheless, the 8 hand-drawn ales available were of a quality capable of raising eulogies from seasoned drinkers, their bar-side converse long hag-ridden by clichés of how much better beer tasted in the good old days. So who, then, was the paragon, the thinking man's barkeep, this publican amongst publicans, the guru of good ale, the tap-room tenant of this drinking man's Valhalla? A carpet-slippered foot flaps upon a stair-tread, the hem of a worn silk dressing-gown brushes the gleaming mahogany top of a Britannia pub table. A gaunt shadow falls across the row of twinkling pump handles as a shaft of sunlight, diamond-flecked with floating motes, glistens upon a brill-creamed barnet. A slim, almost girlish hand snakes out towards the whisky optic. Surely we know those monogrammed carpet slippers, recognise the faded dressing-gown, have seen that brill-creamed head bowed as in reverence as its owner draws off a shot with that slim yet certain hand. Yes, there can be no mistake, no doubt can remain. Neville, the part-time barman. It is he. Neville yawned, belched, scratched at his stomach, and drew off a large measure of breakfast. Flexing his rounded shoulders and puffing out his pigeon chest, he downed the gold watch with a practised wrist flick and prepared himself to face the day. Still a yawning, a belching, and a scratching, yet now inwardly fortified, Neville sallied forth in search of his weekly newspaper. Knowing Norman's paper wall of old, he did not trouble with the doormat. Last week the errant rag had gone to earth in one of the hanging geranium baskets, the week before that in the waste-bin. Neville felt no animosity towards young Zorro, rather a deep sympathy, one which had its foundations in the part-time barman's current passion, psychoanalysis. Every successful barman is something of a natural psychologist, and of late Neville had felt his particular talents leading him into the tortuous labyrinth of the human psyche, and jolly good stuff it all was too. Young Zorro was the case in point. The rolled newspaper and the open letterbox were quite obviously sexual symbols. Zorro probably had a father fixation, or a subconscious desire to return to the womb. Neville also considered that the root cause might lie in Zorro's mother. Perhaps she had been a victim of Brentford's notorious 50s flasher, whose peccadillo was to ring upon a lady's doorbell and poke his willy through the letterbox. Conversely, his mother might have been frightened by a postman during the moment of his conception. Anything was possible. In the cosy bedroom of 9 Noah's Ark Lane, Zorro slept on. He was blissfully unaware of his supposed pathological disorder, simply considering that it was far easier to chuck Neville's paper towards the door while cycling by than struggle to ram it through the inadequately sized, although beautifully polished, letterbox. Neville slipped the bolts upon the saloon bar door and swung it open to the day. As he stood framed magnificently by the famous portal, drawing great draughts of early morning air through his quivering nostrils and exercising what he described as extranasal perception to gauge the quality of the hour, he pondered upon where this week's Mercury might be cooling its metaphorically winged heels. Like the legendary sleuth of old, he knew that when one has eliminated the impossible, then whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must surely be the solution. Such is all well and good, of course, but putting theory into practice is quite another thing. The prospect of rooting in dustbins and shilling up drain pipes to examine dubious gutters held little charm. Neville sighed deeply and took a silent vow that he would deal the errant paperboy the thickest of thick ears the next time their paths crossed. Fixation or no fixation. And there perhaps we might have left Neville, scowling and fuming and preparing to make a lone assault upon the east face of the Flying Swan, had not a small, yet in its own way significant, event now occurred. As he took a deep preparatory breath, the part-time barman suddenly became the unwilling recipient of a great gust of unwholesome stench borne to him upon the formerly rose-tinted Brentford breeze. "By the gods, sir," squawked Neville somewhat nasally as the evil wang engulfed him. He clutched despairingly at his nose and gagged into his hand. His tabloid now forgotten, he fanned at the fetid air and stumbled back into the Swan, slamming the door behind him. With a brief hiss, the tinted rear window of a long black automobile parked outside the Swan sealed itself upon the outer world. The vehicle eased away from the curb and gathered speed along the Ealing Road. Norman, issuing from his corner shop, bulging paper bag upon his shoulder, watched it pass. There wasn't much the wee lad didn't know about cars. His own revolutionary alternative to the internal combustion engine, the Hartnell Harrier, lacking but a few essential parts in the lock-up, but this one fair had him foxed. Not only was it utterly silent, but it also lacked all evidence of exhaust pipes. Norman scratched at his head, raising small little clouds of dust. Now, how was that done, he wondered? Antimatter drive? Plasma photon ionizers, utilizing a cross-polarization of beta particles to bombard an interrositor through the medium of a subatomic converter. It seemed the most logical probability. Making a hasty note upon the back of a woodbine packet, Norman hefted his bag and set out upon his paper round.